日本有日本的绝招，韩国有韩国的妙计。毕竟像日本首相高市早苗那样，在特不靠谱面前又笑又跳，又挽胳膊，又陪看球，正襟危坐的韩国总统李在明真做不出来。但没关系，韩国人也有自己的办法。看李在明10月29日接待川普3个很有意思的小细节。第一个细节，金色领带，很罕见地，李在明带了条金色领带。为什么金色？很简单，川普最喜欢，大统领喜欢，那韩国就狠狠做。看报道，李在明招待川普午餐，最后就以金色蛋糕的甜点结束。第二个细节，无穷花大勋章，又是金质大勋章。按照韩国的解释，这还是韩国的最高荣誉，川普也成为第一位获此殊荣的美国总统。川普果然很高兴，感叹他美得无与伦比，我真想立刻就戴上。第三个细节，金色王冠，这也是最让全世界称奇的一个细节。美国人不断发起不要国王的示威活动，韩国却向川普送出一个真王冠，这是出土的新罗王国王冠的复制品。华盛顿邮报注意到，川普紧盯着这顶王冠，旁边一名韩国官员向他解释，王冠象征着天命与王权的结合，以及领袖的强大领导力和权威。虽然美国人抗议不断，但川普毫不避讳转发自己戴王冠的视频，韩国人更投其所好，这顶王冠你肯定喜欢。不得不说，韩国人真是用心良苦。我看到很多外媒都认为，韩国人这样做就是希望讨好川普，从美国获得关税谈判的让步，但结果呢？该要的美国一分也不会少要。在韩国，川普高兴地宣布，美韩基本敲定贸易协定，美国同意将韩国关税从 25% 下调到 15%， 但代价是韩国至少在美国投资3500亿美元。这3500亿美元项目中，韩方现金投资2000亿，另外1500亿美元用于造船。韩国官员说，每年投资上限为200亿美元，最大限度地减少市场受到的影响。也真难为了韩国，因为说是韩国投资，但钱都是韩国出，主导权美国掌握，增加的是美国就业，主要收益也归美国，亏损韩国自己承担，更多是送钱罢了。但韩国也没办法，旁边的邻国日本一把投出5500亿美元。韩国如果少了，川普不答应。李在明曾一度也很犹豫，披露美韩双方在投资方式、投资金额、时间表以及如何分担损失和分配收益，所有这些上都尚未达成一致。他说，美国当然会试图最大化自身利益，但不能给韩国带来灾难性后果，请注意灾难性影响。但从目前结果看，即便送出了金色勋章、金色王冠，川普竹杠依然敲得梆梆响。哪怕是灾难性影响，韩国人也只能从了。国际关系中，有时谦卑的姿态背后藏着一个民族难以言说的尊严和利益的代价。所以我们看到一个非常有意思的现象，韩国领导人热情招待美国总统，对川普各种夸赞，韩国民众则在强烈抗议韩国屈膝让步，高呼不要国王。韩国人很焦虑，这样大幅度的让步，且不提韩国的国家尊严，3500亿美金的巨额支出，掏空的是韩国产业，损害的韩国民生。更别忘了，不久前美国警察突袭在美韩国企业，像犯人一样带走大批韩国人，众目睽睽下给他们上手铐、脚铐、腰链子，让韩国人大为震惊。他们去为美国人创造就业机会，却被美国人这样羞辱。韩国民主劳动党前总统候选人全英国就在抗议集会上就痛心疾首说，世界各国领导人和政府都在忙着奉承特不靠谱，使出浑身解数展现外交魅力，就为了说服他将美国关税降低几个百分点，这简直太荒谬了。这个世界荒谬的事情还少吗？怎么看？完全我个人观点，不代表任何机构。3点粗浅看法吧。第一，李在明还是比高市早苗差远了，虽然使出了浑身解数，但实事求是地说，在讨得特不靠谱欢心方面，李在明比高市早苗差了真不是一星半点。从川普肢体语言中，我们都看得很清楚，高市早苗主动挽着他的手，川普很是享受。李在明送他重礼，但共进午餐时，川普依然一脸不高兴。从这个角度看，美国在对日韩方面毫无疑问更偏向日本。如果让川普知道李在明还发布了这样的演讲，估计更会暴跳如雷。在 APEC 工商领导人峰会上，李在明说，在保护主义与民族主义抬头，各国聚焦眼前生存的当下，合作 共存与包容性增长这些词听上去似乎很空洞，然而正是在这种危机时刻 ，APEC 作为团结平台的作用才愈发凸显。李在明说得很对，但关键是川普认同吗？第二，用心良苦未必不会竹篮打水。日本的5500亿美元，韩国的3500亿美元，最终会是什么结果呢？我看到很多日本人都预感是不祥之兆，一些人就指责这完全是慷国家之慨，解美国之欢心，毕竟这些钱也是日本人的血汗钱啊。有日本网友就痛斥，看到日本的这种让步，负担沉重到足以让日本沉沦半个世纪。这不是我说的，这是日本人自己说的。国家间的博弈从来不是心诚则灵的单相思，而往往是利益与实力的冷酷权衡。从这个角度看，在这个不公正的世界，不是每一个国家都有实力和底气对美国的霸凌说不，从而坚决捍卫国家的尊严和利益。哎，春已走，花又落，用心良苦却成空，他们的痛最终该怎么形容？第三，国际格局正在发生重大裂变，世界100年未有之大变局，又出来一个川普，我们真的是在见证历史。世间多少苦心经营，终不过是他国棋局中的一粒弃子，太多的世态炎凉，让人感慨万千。别的不说，就说加拿大。加拿大眼睁睁地看着美国与日本、韩国把酒言欢，但曾经最亲密的加拿大却被抛弃在一边，还不断遭到川普的重锤。川普更明确表态，韩国 APEC 峰会期间自己没空见加拿大总理卡尼。我看报道，据说日本也已转告加拿大，高市早苗太忙了，无法安排与卡尼的见面。
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Although some important federal government data have been delayed due to the shutdown, the public and private sector data that have remained available suggest that the outlook for employment and inflation has not changed much since our meeting in September. Conditions in the labor market appear to be gradually cooling, and inflation remains somewhat elevated. In support of our goals and in light of the balance of risks to employment and inflation, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by a 1/4 percentage point. We also decided to conclude the reduction of our aggregate securities holdings as of December 1. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Available indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a moderate pace. GDP rose at a 1.6% pace in the first half of the year, down from 2.4% last year. Data available prior to the shutdown show that growth in economic activity may be on a somewhat firmer trajectory than expected, primarily reflecting stronger consumer spending. Business investment in equipment and intangibles has continued to expand, while activity in the housing sector remains weak. The shutdown of the federal government will weigh on economic activity while it persists, but these effects should reverse after the shutdown ends. In the labor market, the unemployment rate remained relatively low through August. Job gains have slowed significantly since earlier in the year. A good part of the slowing likely reflects a decline in the growth of the labor force due to lower immigration and labor force participation, though labor demand has clearly softened as well. Although official employment data for September are delayed, available evidence suggests that both layoffs and hiring remain low, and that both households' perceptions of job availability and firms' perceptions of hiring difficulty continue to decline. In this less dynamic and somewhat softer labor market, the downside risks to employment appear to have risen in recent months. Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index suggest that total PCE prices rose 2.8% over the 12 months ending in September, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.8% as well. These readings are higher than earlier in the year as inflation for goods has picked up. In contrast, disinflation appears to be continuing for services. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs, as reflected in both market and survey-based measures. Beyond the next year or two or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by a quarter percentage point to 3 3/4 to 4%. Higher tariffs are pushing up prices in some categories of goods, resulting in higher overall inflation. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed. Our obligation is to ensure that a one-time increase in the price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. In the near term, risks to inflation are tilted to the upside and risks to employment to the downside. A challenging situation. There is no risk-free path for policy as we navigate this tension between our employment and inflation goals. Our framework calls for us to take a balanced approach in promoting both sides of our dual mandate. With downside risks to employment having increased in recent months, the balance of risks has shifted. Accordingly, we judged it appropriate at this meeting to take another step toward a more neutral policy stance. With today's decision, we remain well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We continue to face two-sided risks. In the committee's discussions at this meeting, there were strongly differing views about how to proceed in December. A further reduction in the policy rate at the December meeting is not a foregone conclusion. Far from it. Policy is not on a preset course. At today's meeting, the committee also decided to conclude the reduction of our aggregate securities holdings as of December 1. Our long-stated plan has been to stop balance sheet runoff when reserves are somewhat above the level we judge consistent with ample reserve conditions. Signs have clearly emerged that we have reached that standard. In money markets, repo rates have moved up relative to our administered rates, and we have seen more notable pressures on selected dates, along with more use of our standing repo facility. In addition, the effective federal funds rate has begun to move up relative to the rate of interest on reserve balances. These developments are what we expected to see as the size of our balance sheet declined and warrant today's decision to cease runoff. Over the 3.5 years that we've been shrinking our balance sheet, our securities holdings have declined by $2.2 trillion. As a share of nominal GDP, our balance sheet has fallen from 35% to about 21%. In December, we'll enter the next phase of our normalization plans by holding the size of our balance sheet steady for a time, while reserve balances continue to move gradually lower as other non-reserve liabilities, such as currency, keep growing. We will continue to allow agency securities to run off our balance sheet and will reinvest the proceeds from those securities in Treasury bills, furthering progress toward a portfolio consisting primarily of Treasury securities. This reinvestment strategy will also help move the weighted average maturity of our portfolio closer to that of the outstanding stock of Treasury securities, thus furthering the normalization of the composition of our balance sheet. The Fed has been assigned two goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to supporting our maximum employment, bringing our inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Nick.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall